19th century book housed in one of the university's libraries is bound in human skin.
Through the ages, we have gathered a lot of knowledge and learned much about the world and ourselves. When thinking about it in such a way, we could consider history to be quite a good teacher.
Hundreds of women in the U.S. would work closely with the element, unaware that it was slowly devouring them from the inside out.
On the other hand, it isn't just knowledge that was recorded and that we are left with. Instead, there are many weird things that have stuck with us through the ages. Today, we will take a look at 20 historical facts that will most certainly disturb you. A woman who gave birth to bunnies. Let's start off quite strong. By saying this, we will count on you preparing to hear something that may make your stomach move. It certainly did so for the person that we will describe. One of the weirdest tales that we have recorded ever dates back to the 18th century, when there was a woman who claimed that she had an amazing but weird ability to give birth to a species that isn't human. Instead, this woman managed to convince the public and even the doctors of that period that she was able to give birth to rabbits. Some of the recordings show that she allegedly gave birth to 20 rabbits. Unfortunately, these were all stillborn. Naturally, this weird case caused a lot of intrigue and exploration. However, it turned out that this entire story was made up. Well, at least parts of it. The woman indeed invested an effort to make it look like true. The rabbits were really leaving her womb in front of doctors. What she later confessed was that she was also the one who placed these animals there. A book whose covers are made of human skin. We believe that this example will already convince you that we are not joking when we claim that you will be left quite moved with each of the following cases. The next one we bring you is about a book that was discovered inside Harvard University's library in 2014. The analysis of the weird book found that it was made somewhere around the 1880s, but that isn't where the bizarre part comes from. Instead, it is the material used to bind it together. Even in this book, it was written that since it concerns the human soul, it also deserves a human covering. By now, you may have guessed that the book's cover was made of human skin. Radium Girls. Now that we have had a strong start, let's try to keep up the pace. The next case we bring you is that of Radium Girls. This historical fact takes us back to the early 20th century, and the girls that it is about were working on painting various objects. While that job isn't weird itself, what they used to paint with is the source of all the disturbing events that followed. Namely, their job was to color the watch dials with a substance that glows in the dark and, as you could have guessed from the name, it contained radium. While it is amazing to have a watch that's even useful in the dark, the effects of radium on humans are quite devastating. A detail that was later found out is that they also used to put the brushes covered with this substance between their lips so that the point of the brush would be more precise. All of this is why they started exhibiting unbelievably scary symptoms that included pain in random parts of their body, heavy fractures, and even glowing wounds. Radium Girls will be remembered not just for their frightening destinies, but also for bringing forward some of the first requests to protect humans from radiation. Ancient Viking punishment. The pain that was the result of the previously described experience was a byproduct of the substance used in the girls' work. In this next example, we bring you a story of quite consciously applied punishment. If you are a fan of the famous show called Vikings, you may remember the scary sentence that Ragnar puts one of the Vikings through. It's called the Blood Eagle. In this gruesome punishment, what happens is that the person's back is carved into the shape of an eagle using their own flesh and bones in the process. The final decoration that was used was the victim's lungs. The Dancing Plague. While the title of this next historical fact sounds almost fun, we assure you that you will change your mind soon enough. Back in 1518, on the territory that represents nowadays France, This weird form of plague appeared where people started behaving very irrationally, but still, looking at it from a side, they could appear entirely merry. Apparently, a woman from which this plague started began dancing in public and kept doing so for an entire week. It seems that her dance moves were quite contagious, and many have started joining her through time. Now, even if we were to enjoy raving as much as the next person, the trouble with this dance came from it never stopping. These people never paused to even catch a breath, and some of them were pushed so far as to collapse from various health issues caused by such exhausting and constant movements. Even though this event was well recorded, we don't have a clear picture of why it happened and what could have caused this seemingly fun plague. Baby cages. Throughout history, people have come up with many devices that were thought of as quite useful and amazing. Some of these have, however, turned out to be quite disturbing once a more modern mind takes a look at them. We present you the baby cage. This product became increasingly popular in 1922 in the United States, and about 10 years later, it found its way across the globe. The idea appears simple enough. What better way to provide a baby with enough fresh air and sunshine than placing it in the natural environment? However, it seems that life was picking up pace even back then, and since people lived in apartments, they felt that hanging a cage from their balcony or window was the perfect opportunity for children to enjoy the outdoors. Interestingly enough, it didn't occur to us that it may be weird to leave your children in a cage hanging from a building when some even avoid putting plants in this position nowadays. Since we have developed different ideas of what's to be considered child safety over time, these cages have become a part of history. Real-life Dracula. Moving from this invention, which certainly seemed clever at the time when it was popular, we come across a more mysterious and scary historical fact. It revolves around a person that could be called Dracula or Vlad the Impaler. The man was born in 1431 in Transylvania, a part of today's Romania. To become known as one of the most brutal fellows in history certainly takes a lot of effort and gruesome actions. The name that he got comes from his preferred method of execution, which included long, sharp stakes and leaving the bodies hanging on them. He seems to have enjoyed this bizarre activity and used it to put fear in people's hearts. Considering that these methods are very scary even today, we can imagine the fear that this must have instilled in the Ottoman soldiers who opposed Vlad the Impaler. Besides being brutal, the man proved to be an expert in intimidation and discouraging his enemies even before the battle occurred. Thanks to his bloody role in history, Vlad the Impaler became the inspiration for the famous fictional character Dracula. Portugal's Corpse Queen. This next story dates back to the 1300s, and almost as a good drama, it had the elements of power struggles and romantic love affairs. What occurred at this already disturbing time was that a prince had a child with a woman who he apparently loved with all his heart. Since such an affair wasn't welcomed, the woman was put to death, and this set the prince on the path of vengeance. After becoming king and grasping the power that comes with the position, he decided to take revenge on those who stole his would-be queen from him. The way that he has chosen to exact this revenge is quite weird. The body of his deceased lover was dug out and placed beside him during his coronation. In this manner, he decided that she would indeed become his queen, while making those who contributed to her departure bow to her at the same time. A bizarre slimming solution. In the previous example, we see that the queen was able to thrive, even after the worms had already been done with her. The next disturbing historical fact that we'll bring you has to do with a slimming solution that certainly took things to another level. In the early 20th century, what became a popular weight loss method was ingesting a tapeworm. The idea behind it would be that instead of digesting all the food, a part of it would be eaten by the tapeworm, making you able to enjoy tasty treats and not get overweight in the process. Admittedly, the gross part wasn't the ingestion of the worm, as it was apparently available in the form of a pill that you would swallow. However, let's not forget that this disgusting parasite was growing in the person's body. The Titanic's demise was predicted. The curious adventure we are leading you through has taken us to a famous ship called the Titanic. This giant has inspired, according to some, the most romantic movie of all time. But this isn't why we are talking about it here. Instead, we go back to a period, 14 years before the Titanic sank. Indeed, the plan was for this ship to be as safe as it could be, but 14 years prior to this turning out not to be true, a book was published predicting the disaster. If you think this is a coincidence, let us tell you that the name of the novel is The Wreck of the Titan, which Morgan Robertson published. In this book, the writer describes how the world's largest passenger ship, Titan, would sink after hitting an iceberg. We leave you to ponder whether this is just a coincidence or another instance of absurd and unexplainable predictions. A man that ate essentially anything. There truly isn't a need for many words to describe the next disturbing historical figure that we will tell you about. The person's name was Tarare, and in 1772 he was a French soldier and quite a showman. Tarare had an insatiable appetite, and as we have introduced him, he was a man who would eat essentially anything. During his life, besides the vast amounts of meat, he has consumed quite unexpected things. At some point, he was recorded as having eaten meals intended for 15 people. He even ate live animals, including snakes and various lizards, staying quite slim despite his humongous appetite. After he passed away, it was discovered that it was his abnormally wide gullet that stood behind this unbelievable ability he was found to have. Edison's talking dolls. While we could start by saying that we understand that some inventions took time before they were perfected, there aren't many that had as weird a starting phase as Edison's talking doll. Nowadays, the concept of a talking doll is quite common, but over 100 years ago, it wasn't. The first talking dolls Edison made didn't just look creepy, but the recording they played in 1888 was also very creepy sounding. It was a recitation of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, recorded by a woman, and as you can imagine today, it could inspire a horror movie. Ancient Asian practice, lotus feet. In one of the previous cases, we have shown you a man with a very strong stomach. This is exactly what you would need to be able to watch the next story we'll bring you. This ancient Asian practice is known as foot binding, and it stands behind what's known as lotus feet. It started around the 10th century, and as we could guess, it involved tightly binding the feet of young girls to prevent them from growing. The ritual even changed the shape of the feet. This weird procedure started when girls were between 4 and 10 years old, and it included first placing the feet in warm water. This is believed to be what softens the extremities and makes them more prone to changing shape, which was the ultimate goal of this practice. Once they had been made soft by the warm water, the toes were pushed below and tightly pressed against the bottom of the foot with the binds. This procedure was repeated many times before the final shape of the feet could be reached. Now, after explaining this disturbing procedure, we may ask ourselves why someone would do this. Well, apparently beauty hurts, and having these weirdly shaped small feet were considered gorgeous. It seems we humans have done many weird things throughout history, and this could be one of them, considering that these women later had serious issues with moving and long-term disabilities. King Tutankhamun's parents. The tomb of Tutankhamun is one of the most famous archaeological discoveries, and it has become so familiar that it is often the first association for Egypt. It has inspired many in their search for other similar artifacts and left us wondering about various rituals that were going on in this historical period. Since we are curious creatures, there are still many who are trying to understand this iconic figure and everything about him in more detail. Some of the interesting historical facts that turned up have to do with Tutankhamun's parents. It became known that his father was the ruler of Egypt in the 14th century BC, but not much has been known about his mother. As our technology has developed, we have become able to decipher mysteries by analyzing DNA, and based on the results of such analysis, King Tutankhamun's mother may have actually been his aunt, or simply put, his father's sister. Zombie apocalypse. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt definitely had a sense of immortality about them. The next story we bring you is about a zombie apocalypse that happened in Europe in 1495. Nowadays, we are quite familiar with various works of fiction featuring undead zombies, but what happened back then in Italy were similar scenes that are actually a part of real life. Imagine walking through the streets of old Naples and coming across numerous people who are strolling around with missing body parts and open wounds all over. The reason for this creepy situation is that there was an outbreak of super syphilis that was brought by overseas sailors. What this specific string of syphilis has done to the human body was quite gruesome. It was so gruesome, in fact, that people started rotting even while they were still alive and breathing. Unfortunately, we had no modern medicine back in the day that could stop this scary disease from spreading. If you want to imagine how these zombies looked in more detail, think about human faces, lacking noses and lips, which were usually gone or covered with ulcers. This specific string of syphilis seems to have disappeared, along with many victims that had it. Lobotomy. Mental health and well-being are certainly topics that the world takes much more seriously today than it used to be the case throughout history. We have made significant progress in trying to understand our fellow humans and help them have as peaceful lives as they can. As the fields of psychology and psychiatry developed, we made adjustments to the treatment of patients, which used to be quite brutal just a few thousand years back. One of the procedures that was considered a cure for mental health issues is called lobotomy, and if you're unaware of this procedure, brace yourself for quite a story. When there were people who had maniacal and what was described as tough-to-control behavior and nothing seemed to help, a lobotomy was performed so that these people could calm down and be brought to a more tranquil behavior. The procedure itself included using a metal instrument that was inserted through an opening in the corner of the person's eye, after which it was vigorously rotated inside. What this does to a person's behavior is certainly bringing their level of energy down, but not due to actual healing, but quite the opposite. These procedures left the person's brain severely damaged. Throughout history, we have certainly made many mistakes, and before we realized how unacceptable this was, lobotomies were performed routinely. Ancient Roman teeth whitening substance. Similar to the previously described procedure, this next case is also about a peculiar remedy. Unlike the one from the previous video, this one won't leave you with a damaged brain, but the smell of your breath may take a turn for the worse. Apparently, Romans were quite into aesthetics, especially when it comes to teeth. This was so important to them that they came up with a solution that was supposed to whiten your teeth. While having shining teeth isn't something we may be opposed to, the substance that they used was quite a strange one. It included a mixture of human urine and animal milk. For it to take effect, it was then used essentially as a mouthwash. The weirdest thing about this disturbing historical fact is that it could have actually worked. Apparently, the ammonia in the mixture could have had some whitening effect. Dead soldiers' teeth. Since we have stumbled upon the topic of oral hygiene, let's briefly look into the history of dentures. Apparently, once we had reached the idea that we could use something to replace our teeth, we weren't sure how to do it immediately. We believed that replacing the missing teeth with something would help both aesthetically and functionally, but the question of how to do it wasn't the issue. Instead, it was what to replace the missing tooth with. Since we haven't had the modern technology and materials to create artificial teeth, we apparently stumbled upon the idea of using someone else's teeth. At least we were sensible enough not to just walk around and steal people's teeth. We searched for suitable donors, many of which turned out to be deceased soldiers. As we can imagine, a soldier's job was such that it carried great risk. Since there were many victims of such war efforts, dentists saw this as an opportunity and used the teeth that could be retrieved from the dead soldiers to make dentures. A headless chicken. In one of the previous examples, we have seen that some events in history have left us with a sense that there was a zombie apocalypse in Europe at one point. The next disturbing historical fact is about a chicken that managed to live for quite some time despite having no head. It happened in 1945 in Colorado. In plans to prepare dinner, a farmer was about to take this chicken's head, but since he missed and removed just a part of it, he realized that the feathery creature still had the will to survive. Even though it was missing a part of its head, the farmer decided to keep it alive by dripping water and putting small pieces of food in an opening that was left after the cut. Since it turned out that the chicken could actually function in this way, it became quite an attraction and a circus show that traveled all around, showcasing Mike the Headless Chicken. An ancient medicine. Now that we have reached the last disturbing historical fact that we will show you today, we have already been educated about some crazy things that people attempted or have done throughout history. We have seen many weird remedies by now, but this one is certainly quite unique and, we may say, rare. Apparently, medieval Europeans believed that Egyptian mummies carried a potential cure-all. In the 15th century, the bodies preserved as mummies were used as medicine, and if you're wondering how, well, it's quite simple. You take parts of an Egyptian mummy, grind them down into fine dust, and use them to soothe your stomachache or any similar pain that you may feel. Besides this making no sense, the pursuit of such medicine led many to seek and steal from Egyptian tombs. Symbolically, we could say that people promptly ate important historical relics. These were all the disturbing historical facts that we wanted to present to you today. Thank you for sticking around and taking a stroll down the history lane with us. We hope you have enjoyed it.